seems like we're good to go again. So once again, I do applaud the fact that a number of people are taking the trouble to look into this old land. And I do like to caution that humans, no matter whether they're black or white, have had a fairly dramatic impact on every landscape. And it's not fair to say that the Aborigines didn't. And it's not good for us to take away the idea that if you've reduced the biodiversity to a third, that if you've actually created a drainage system that wasn't in place originally, and that in fact you've destroyed a megafauna and maybe brought about a fact that lake air is now salty where it was fresh, that those changes, we should recognise that we all have to work together and we can all fix it, because this is the very important single message that this whole landscape offers. It has the longest hours of sunlight. It evolved the singing birds, the flowering plants, and the 2/3 of the fish species, because the block west of here is 3.5 billion years old. So we have the privilege of owning the oldest land in the world that has produced the most significant changes in the world, and that it had the best climate in the world under the worst natural conditions. In other words, we don't have a mountain range, snow-fed rivers, we didn't have a large water body in the centre. All of the things that should have made this the worst landscape in the world, yet we know that it was the best, because we can measure backwards very accurately, and we're very poor at knowing what might happen tomorrow. So what I want to do is trying to identify how is it that we had such a wonderful opportunity and gone so long and overlooked this potential. There's a few questions I'm going to run very quickly through, and I want you to consider, if you were going to make a good decision about anything, you need to know the most fundamental relationships that decision is based on. And I'm going to run through 12 questions, and I'm going to make you answer them. But I want you to consider whether you answered them correctly or not. Then before you make your next decision, run a checklist through and see if in fact you've answered these 12 questions. What are the three energies that run a farm? And of course, answer, sir?
Sunlight, gravity and capillary action.
That's right. Then we go to the next one very quickly.
What was it? Sunlight.
Sunlight, gravity and capillary action. You know, we don't realise that if we're all living in energy. Every farmer sells energy every day. That's the only reason people buy it, because it gets them to move, grow, or whatever, keep warm. And so as the sun comes in and a plant converts it to a product, a good farmer turns that product into something he can sell for the best price with the least amount of cost. And what we have is a landscape that ran itself, and all these things are automatic, and so it should be cheap. This is the next really simple one, we should all get this. How do we assess our farm productivity? I've just told you. It's how much sunlight we convert into a product every day. All the rest is nonsense. It's just allowing us to take ourselves into an area where we're destroying our own asset and not getting a product. If you're selling energy, you have to bring it in every day if you want to maintain your economic balance. As soon as you don't do that, you're selling your asset, either your soil reserves or some other part of your asset which is all energy based. Erosion, what is the most available and pure water on your farm? How many of you have thought that one through and answered it instantly? That's dew, of course, because it's evaporated out generally after about 11 o'clock in the day, and it's only in the atmosphere for a few hours. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you'd probably notice that in a nice dense area, the dew is back on the plants again. What it's done in that time is cooled the day, and it's absorbed the heat. Then when it comes back and condenses again, releases the heat. So it air conditions every day, reducing that huge thermal variation that causes our storms and all the other damage that happens in the landscape. Here we go, this is another very simple one. We all think about highs and lows pressures, and then I add the extra of what powers a cyclone, a tornado, or a typhoon. Massive energy sources, tips a house over, lifts things off the ground, and a high and low pressure system. And what we do is we watch as the clouds roll in from the west and they gather. What it's doing is causing water particles to go back to a particle from a gas in the atmosphere. So it's actually shrinking. That means it's lowering the pressure. Then we watch them come in and they're dissipating into the atmosphere. They're absorbing heat, so they're expanding. I wasn't taught that when I was at school, and most of you wouldn't have been either. Then when we walk out there, we can be our own judge of what's going on simply by understanding some of these very simple things. Here you go, this is the next one. This is really, really important if you understand. You run a cash book, you have to have a credit system and a debit system. When the landscape tries to keep everything in balance, which it has to be for us to be healthy, it has to have something that creates a credit, because we know that every time we eat something or harvest something, we create a debit. Now there's a very simple process in this. If the credit system was edible while it was growing, it wouldn't happen. So we have a range of non-edible plants while they're growing to keep the credit system going so that we can keep maintaining grasslands and fruiting plants and so on. Why is it we didn't get that? It can't work any other way. Let's quieten a few down. Come on, let's go again. Do you believe salt rises? Yeah, of course you do, because you read in the damn paper. Now listen, how many of you pick up the salt shaker and tip it on the dinner and expect to float off into the air? Well, you know damn well it doesn't rise. Can't do that. And it can't do it unless there's another energy pushing it up, or it's pushing it sideways. It never rises, not even when it's in other water or whatever. There's always another energy. We can't get something that's heavier to rise. Now, this is the big thing with one of these things that confuses us. We've got a water particle, molecule, if we want to call it that, and I'm not sure that that's a very good description, because we apply heat to it and it gets lighter. And then we apply cold to it and it gets lighter. That's a trick that we don't sort of rationalise very often. But water is a very amazing particle within the system, and it's confused us all very easily simply because we think of it as a simple molecule, but it should do the same thing all the time. Well, it doesn't. And then we've got the situation where it's got a hydrogen attack, a huge energy thing. They know the sun runs on hydrogen, the cosmos runs on hydrogen. And yet when we think that we get a photosynthetic process going on and we're breaking hydrogen from oxygen, that it wouldn't release a lot of heat or do something. And of course it does. And that means that the atmosphere, every time that plants are growing, gets multiple more water vapor in it than if it was just sitting there with no plants. Are water tables in some cases bad? And of course, we would think, and we're told, oh, all you blokes are drainage specialists, unfortunately. Because you know, in Europe, as we buggered up the land over there and it got hotter and hotter and there's more water heat, the water was higher and higher, so it snowed on the tops of the mountains. Then when the sun came up and you wanted to run agriculture, it sent it back to you again. So it was a bloody fool's paradise, and we did all the dumbass things. Then we came out here. Doesn't work here. It's quite different. And so the difference is here, that water table process made this the greatest landscape on the planet. Because if you've got water just under the roots and it's easy to use gravity to lower it, I first learnt to profile water tables so I could move them down so they just weren't too wet, they were just as I wanted them. Simple. Gravity did it all, cost nothing. That means that the plant reaches down to the water and pulls out exactly what it needs to grow, 100% efficient. You can't do better. That's what this old landscape office has offered us if we get it back again. What would you consider your soil similar to things we have in human industry? And of course it's a factory, it's a processing factory. As the food things are used and plants grow, the next cycle of plants process it, and then when they decompose, this is the next thing for agriculture. They slow release the most important compounds you need for agriculture. Slow release it. We can't make a fertilizer that's that effective. Yet we can grow it in the sunlight for nothing, and we don't do it. Simply because we think they're not edible. So why would we grow them? The stock can't eat them, and that's not even true. If you measure weed plants, they've either got a thorn on them or a tannin in them. Once they get old, the tannin oxidizes and they're quite edible, and usually if you measure them, they're probably 7% protein, and your grasses are lucky to be that when they're growing. Or when they've got a thorn on them, which makes them very efficient in water. We hear about dew point, but that means the dew sets on a point and then it runs down the thorn to the stomata that's sitting at the bottom of the thorn. And if we start looking at these plants carefully, we find they're not actually a foreign body, they're part of a leaf that just modifies a little bit. So they're really a leaf, but they're a protective mechanism and a watering mechanism for the plant. Why don't we understand more about how our plants work? What are the three basic functions of plants? And we all think we know everything about plants, and I've asked this question many times. A few people I won't keep to mentioning here never get the answers. You know, a function is what the plant contributes to your daily program. And of course, they're a solar-powered pump. What gravity's pushing into the soil, the weed and deep-rooted, tap-rooted plant follows it down, then using atmospheric moisture mostly, not having to get rain. So it grows when we don't want it because it's not raining, but it's growing because it's doing something we have to have happen. If we can't bring it back to the top to feed our next lot of grass, we don't get it. Or we go and buy some fertilizer and wonder why we go broke. And then the next thing is, they're a solar-powered air conditioner. They use water to cool the day, and then when they recover the water again, they warm the night. And then they're a solar-powered factory. They reprocess everything. It's the most amazing process of solar use that we've got. Why don't we use it more often? Why do we kill it out? Why do we spend hundreds of millions of dollars destroying it because somebody said it wasn't native? And I say to a lot of people in this landscape, well, you better all clear out, because none of you are native. And none of this crap's native. And none of the things we've done to the water or the roads or the buildings is native. But what's been going on for 5,000 years are people been walking all across Europe and selecting plants that best compensated for all of the rubbish that they do everywhere. And we don't want to use them here because for some reason they're not native. I can't think of anything that is more stupid than that, if you want to know. And you've only got to walk around anywhere. Walk over there into those trees in the middle of summer. It'll be 10 degrees cooler than out here or on that roadway. Probably 20 degrees. What's happened to the heat? And it's not shade. You can put an umbrella up or a gum tree, and it's nearly as hot as it was in the sun. Or nearly. Not as, nearly. The second is that the gum tree doesn't do that. It was designed for a different purpose. It was designed to grow way up above the forest and stop the water vapour being swept out by the winds. That's written in our landscape too, in our history. We suddenly think they were the forest. They weren't. They were a specialist plant to do a specialist job. And they're incendiaries as well. And there we go again. We're back to the poor old tree. And we plant trees to fix the landscape. And this is what will happen. It can only deliver 7% of its mass. Otherwise it's just sitting there, maybe doing all of the things that the other three plants do. Like it's cooling, it's doing those things. If it's a good plant, it's not a eucalypt, they're a lazy thing. They sit there like a drug addict on the beach, and when there's plenty of water, they throw it all around. And then when things get tough, they go, you've got to look after me, or I'll be in trouble. So they only present 7%, which you all do. You know, you lose your hair and your fingernails and a bit of skin, which is 7% of your mass. They've got to get to 30 years old. Some have got to get to 100 years old before they make a contribution to the environment that is greater than normal oxidation and a leaching rate that happens. And we don't see it. You go and look at these big patches of the eucalypt plantings, and usually there's a burnt house in the middle of them. And we don't see it. All trees 10 or 12 years old, and the house is gone. How come we can't figure that one out? It's everywhere. And they're spending your money planting more. What is the environmental progression of a landscape? We plan landscapes, we build farms, we put in fences. And most people don't answer this. You've got to have fertility being continually produced at the highest point so gravity can keep moving it, else the thing fails. So you've got to have a forest type mix, or you've got to cart it up, or you've got to feed it on the top of the hill. And then it's got to come down to the best filtering system you could possibly have, which is aquaculture system. Because then you can stop it going to the sea or off your farm, and you can put it back on the hill again, and it's an automatic regenerating system. How many of you have got a farm built like that? And it would cost nothing, because it used to be automatic everywhere in this landscape. Right, I'll stop bullying you now. And there's one more. Can you imagine a scientific development that we could produce that would manage the heat from the sun? No way in the world. Photosynthesis and water is the only one. And doesn't matter whatever else we do, if we don't get our head back where it needs to be, and that's out in the fresh air where we can smell things and not where some people have got it at the present time, we won't solve ourselves. Okay, move on. Now, because I've been giving you a hammering, I'm just going to show you that this is never my opinion. I go to the very best brains I can find in the world, and I do these things. I say as much as I can to them. And I said, if there's something unscientific about what I'm telling you, you better tell me, because I think it's all connected. So this group of people, and I've got a lot more, I want to bring into a focused group, and then we want to select out of them an advisory group, so that the various models that are all across this landscape and the demonstration sites, both from what Aborigines damage did and what we've done and what our animals have done, we can see the good and the bad and the ugly and the opportunity that exists. That's why it is the greatest laboratory in the world, not because it was like that 60,000 years ago, but because we've stuffed it in so many directions. The clear evidence is what went wrong and what we need to do to fix it and how we can manage it. Because you take it away the situation, it was automatic once. It managed everything that we're trying to manage today without any interference. So if we keep a clear mind and we get the best advice, we must all be able to do it. This is just the toe and park issue, but you were going to have some interviews, weren't you? I thought my technician has just got himself tangled up. And don't worry about it, well, I'll tell another lie somewhere. I'll find another way to. Does anyone have a question up to now? Because surely somebody says, the stupid old bastard, what's he up there telling me all this stuff for? Making me feel embarrassed. You see, the first thing we got to do, all of us, and it happened to me a long time ago, is put a hand up and say, guilty as charged, Your Honour, I haven't looked at the obvious. And I haven't taken advantage of the most opportunistic proposition that's ever been. Well done. And we all want to do this, because that way the bureaucrats who are so sure they know everything, and every time they write a piece of paper they can confuse everybody, well, not this time. We got the evidence out there, and it's without question. And it's able to be seen and measured any time you want to force them to do it. Now, I want you all to take this away, because I'm doing it. They've breached their duty of care, because this is being publicised by many people for a long time. It's been available for anyone who looks at history. It's available for anyone who takes the trouble to look at what does hydrology do, what are the basic functions the landscapes do, why don't we understand the sun's energy is converted by plants, and why do we get rid of plants without learning that we have to recycle them, and all of these basic functions that they should all know, because that's what we employ them for. And if they spend any more of your money wasting it on some of these mad-ass schemes that we've got, their fiduciary duty is at fault. And you need all to say it, because unless we do, it'll keep happening. Because it's easier to do the wrong thing than to take the responsibility of recognising you have to change.
If you go to the properties where Peter Andrews has been working, those properties from the era are green.
This is a Professor David Mitchell.
Property is brown.
I haven't dreamed up something. I've gone out and said, there it is. That's how it works.
Cop this, look out you mob.
The car will drive somewhere else.
If we can get this up as a model, say that, well, here it is, you know, we've got eminent scientists all agreeing that this works.
Once you get the hydrology right, this grass mix will stand 5 months or more.
That's fantastic.
So that's 5 centimetres of soil formation. I go over farmland all across the Central West, and you never see soil being built, you see it being degraded. Now here in 18 months, you are seeing soil made on top of sand by a very simple process, and the organic layer is quite significant, that black layer that starts to form. I think it's the most significant contribution to landscape restoration that I've seen in Australia.
So much of it depends on the ability that Peter has to read the landscape and to know how to intervene. And that's the most difficult part of taking Peter's work, because you can do a lot of damage if you didn't know what you were doing. Peter's understood what to do, but often it's difficult to explain that to somebody else, and sometimes people are concerned, well, what if you get it so wrong you can make things worse? Peter can see changes in gradients and actually understand the previous stream structure. He is actually a very, very good geomorphologist.
Pre-European history in Australia, the soils were more like that here. Then they became like that in recent times. And now, in very recent times, in the last year or so, Peter has brought soils back to more like this. And I think that is phenomenal. It's exciting.
And it all comes together in this very simple process that he, in a sense, has reinvented, but it was always there in the Australian landscape. I think Peter is a near genius. He's a simple farmer who's understood science better than most scientists, if not all scientists.
So it's a kind of a stabilising, maturing process.
Yeah, that I think is fun.
And they come somewhat grudgingly to learn at his feet.
Peter's got some theories that really challenge existing theories on how streams and landscapes function.
There's a real influence of groundwater recharge here.
We've spoken to landholders upstream and downstream, and they've seen the results, and now they're virtually beating on the door to get involved in some way, from the top of the valley right to the bottom of the valley.
A lot of leaf litter accumulating.
So what's interesting here is he's trying to raise the groundwater, and elsewhere in Australia, I mean, the message is lower the groundwater because of salinity, but the results are startling. Should we just get moving?
Salinity does take place by a rising water table, but if on top of that rising water table you can actually sit soil with fresh water in it, you can avoid the problem. So what Peter does in summary is he basically fills up the gouged stream channel and then letting the sediment accumulate behind it, and by encouraging therefore the water to flood out, fill up the floodplains and create a freshwater lens which sits on the side.
It's difficult for me to understand what's a greater cause in Australian soil. So listen, here's 100 scientists, here's $100 million or $1 billion, it doesn't matter, right? Get out there and work on this environment. There is nothing more important in our society than the environment that we live in. Nothing.
That same de-energising component of a lot of different speeds of water.
We've been bringing out some European scientists, and they've come out here and they've looked at what he's doing and said, oh, why doesn't your government understand this?
These floodplains produced a regular water pattern.
They see what he's doing as being monumentally important, and that the fact that nothing's happening here very much at all is a great tragedy.
We have practically no alternative to this, what's Peter doing. You are losing water to the sea and never get it back again. You are exporting your water. That's just what you do in Australia. You have to retain the water in the landscape.
What would take 50 years in many places will happen in 5 months here.
I put the question back. Could we afford not to take him seriously if all other scientific approaches to landscape failed?
Peter Andrews, gently and humbly, if you like, is returning the land to what it was naturally before. It's not a panacea. It will need to be used with discretion, with wisdom. Peter has done a huge amount of the pioneering work and has run all the risks that are attendant on that, and has suffered as a consequence.
There's only one way to harness his genius, and that's to act quickly. Peter's not going to be around forever. If he died in a car crash tomorrow, we would lose a priceless national resource that no amount of money would be able to buy.
I'm still only a messenger, and the message needs to be taken around by all you people. We've left it sitting around for too long. The opportunity is getting harder by the day, by the hour, to make the very best use of what's out there. So I guess we can go on talking about it, and I guess one of the things that I like to do at this time is say, how many questions do you have and who's prepared to answer one? I'll probably give you a bit of stick when you ask it, but still, that's the way we learn, isn't it? We get it. And somebody must have a few ideas. Yes?
I have a question. Probably an idiot. You talked about money that's being wasted planting, re-vegging trees. Well, that's the way it sounded to me.
No, that's the way I said it. You got it absolutely correct.
Okay, so are you suggesting that we replant with other, I'm not a farmer, with other forms of vegetation?
Well, if you take a look at this landscape, you wouldn't do the stupid things we're doing, I promise. Because underneath some of these plantations is absolutely nothing, and the soil is eroding for as far as that water goes. And then when the water runs through it in a wet time, it kills all the fish. All this has been measured, tested. Why are we that stupid that we just keep thinking it didn't matter? It doesn't matter. Because I think it does. Beg your pardon?
What are you telling us to plant?
There are at least 14 or 15 species of trees that has been selected by humans. And we're all here, we're not leaving. We're not going to take the animals out that we bought. There's 500 species of them we brought out here. And the only way that a landscape ever worked was that plants made the conditions available for things to move in and live. It doesn't work the opposite way. This business that Savoury's got and all that about the animals making the landscapes rubbish. And we ought to realise that. If you go back in any examination of history, the plants precede the animals by 150 million years, generally. So we want to sort of slaughter a few of these sacred cows that are paddling around. We don't question what's being said. No, enough.
Are you saying they don't have to be native? They can be anything as long as it's the right...
Are you prepared to leave this country and take every damn thing you brought out here?
No.
Well, then you better not worry about nativism. It doesn't mean a damn thing. And what we are doing, in a simple way, is thinking we're not sure what to do next. So we think the native issue would fix it. And yes, if we all left, and we gave all the plants that were here, and don't forget the sheep eaten most of them out, they're gone. But we could bring them back. But the difficulty in bringing them back is the animals that eat them are still here. It's a very difficult job. But I've found every time I use plants that they don't eat when they're growing, that the native plants take over because they're more attuned to these conditions. Until you get the conditions right, they don't dominate again. But everywhere I've worked, they have. We've put in Byalong, 3,000 willow trees. And within 10 years, the casuarinas were growing in the root balls of the willow trees. Within another few years, the willows stopped growing. And at first I had 90% willow trees. If you go there today, and we had Robin Cook, the secretary of the DAF, looking around, and she said, "Oh, I expected to see all willow trees." I said, "The bloody natives have killed them all out," which had happened. So now we've got 90% casuarinas and 10% willow trees, and there are only a few big trees here and there. And everywhere I've worked, if you understand, there's other conditions, of course, that need to be considered and brought into play. That happens. And they are the producers of aspirin. All us old guys are supposed to have an aspirin tablet every day. So we might as well chew down on a willow tree, hadn't we?
So how do the
the willows?
How did they? Well, there is a condition that Australia's landscape demonstrates where if the water's going into the ground and creating a pressure downstream, like if you had water in a pipe, certain plants can live even through very wet periods, even in the water. The willows can live where the water's going into the ground, the casuarinas can't. So until you put a willow in and the willow gets pressure behind it, the casuarina grows behind the willow tree, so when the water's pushing up under the roots of the casuarina and they can live. That's only some science. It's not a guarantee because there's no way you can get all of those answers out of science. And the very good scientists that I work with say, we don't know how much we don't know yet in many of these things, particularly when we talk about the soil. We do know that we could measure nearly all the plants and get a very, very good idea of what they all do and how we could use them. And that in fact there's this guy that I've worked with, he was the chief planner for the Murray-Darling. He spent years living up in the forests in Canada, and he came and looked at this landscape when he was the chief planner for the Murray-Darling and said, wow, you know, what an amazing opportunity this is. And I said to him, before you go back and talk to anybody, will you write me the best scientific description you can think of? And he did, and I think it still holds good today. He said, this landscape is a stepped diffusion system of broadacre hydroponics, which if you understand, all you've got to do is get the right mixes of plants, let water and bacteria and microbial processes decompose them, and run that liquid through the landscape, even on the surface, and you will get the very best results the landscape can produce. And if you want to doubt that, I can take you and show you where we've already done it in a number of places. And we've done it under maximum grazing pressure in a very dry time, and the plants never got bigger than that, and yet it evolved a perfect mix. Until we've actually done it, it's very hard to sort of imagine it would even happen, but it does. Yes, sir?
So you said get the right mixture of plants. Do you have a database or a list of that right mixture?
There's been no information that I've ever been able to find where the environment took a plant out to fix a problem. What it generally did was add 5 or 10 more. I've found that works for me every time I do it. I don't want to answer your question in any specific way, but that's as close as I can get, mate, because the environment is a hugely complex process and we stick to the rules that it has. It's always served me well.
Peter?
Yes?
The rules of planting trees, would that also be dependent on the exact environment you might be in? So there's a nursery, say, down here in Codrington that only plants the natives from this area. So would that be something?
No, I'd shoot them. I'd actually dismiss them altogether.
Right.
So I went down and worked at Melbourne Water, and they wanted me to do some erodive areas where the land was tunnelling and the soil was washing away, and they'd spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I said, well, you know, I don't want to use these plants because they don't do the job we need. Oh, no, they said, you can only use the plants on this side of that slope. I said, what about, no, you can't use one on the other side. Oh, forget it. And I said, these rivers are coming in from 120 miles away and they're all bringing in seed. Oh, no, that doesn't matter, they said. Well, I said, you're all out of, you shouldn't be in the job. That was 30 years ago. Now they're going to get asked the question why they're still in the damn job. Because I'm asking it. I don't know how many of you are going, but I will be.
I think people are struggling with what they actually need to do. Yeah.
You can always do that. But let me tell you something, I promise. We will get the very best brains and go into this landscape where everything has been proven to work and give you the advice you need. There's no single bullet, there's no secret bullet, there's no silver bullet. But there is a hell of a lot of opportunity out there. And we need the best brains and we need to reproduce it. And each one of you can do it because it's automatic once you get started.
So Peter, if you had a property and it had a bit of a creek going through it, was dry and, you know, soil erosion, all that sort of business happening,
what would you do? If I was living in Port Fairy, for instance, and I had a creek that was on my border, and it had no trees around it, and it was soil erosion and not trickling very well. How could I fix that?
You see, that's a good question. I bet you all of you are thinking something similar to that, right? Now, once again, I said it's a very complex answer. So I go back to the very simplest pieces of that puzzle. And I lived in soil which had big cracks in it all over the place. And as kids, we'd see a bit of a storm and a creek would be running in, and we'd be paddling around in, you know, big areas, a few hundred metres, and the water would be running down a crack here, and my sister or brother would be over here. It's here now. So it was running through these cracks, and it was getting exactly the amount of water back into it that had dried out between the dry period that had been between rain events. So what we then realise now, because the animals have filled most of them in, or agriculture, a minimum of 60% more water is now running off. It can't get into the ground. The clay's too dense. So we have to start to go, I have to look after areas where 60% of the water that would normally fall gets a chance to get into the ground. And that means that that's the beginning for everybody. And the design of those things has to be, as the rules we spoke earlier, it has to be able to prevent the minimum erosion beginning and have an unlimited maximum no matter how it rains. It's all been done, it's all able to be advised to you, but I'm not going to stand here and try and explain it. But there will be people around who can help you do that, and that's the only way to go. You wouldn't decide in a modern day motor car to dive into the engine and start pulling some of those computers apart. We don't want to do it with the landscape either, and so the advice will be there, I'm sure, very soon. Yes?
Are you working on getting those sorts of people out into the community who can teach others?
Am I working on it? Absolutely. There's one of them there. If he doesn't get his ass into gear soon, I'll kick it for him. We've got a person you probably know of, Ken Henry, who was out of the Treasury. I've spent about 12 years, 15 years, dragging him around into the landscape and convincing him that all this is real. And I got another fellow out of the Treasury and the Attorney General's Department. I've got another woman at Lismore, very dynamic woman, who's out of both those departments. The people are there, but we need your assistance to cobble them together and get them motivated, because there's a lot of money available that's going to be wasted if we don't do it.
Well, how do you do it? A letter writing? How do we do it?
How do you do it? You just keep notifying your local members, the first issue. Secondly, anyone that's prepared to write in the newspaper, and tell them the simple things that history has told us, that this landscape has demonstrated for us, and that quite a number of people have actually reproduced, is available. Once you do that, it's hard to override the truth. It's done, but it's hard. It's a lot easier to cover up a lot of bullshit in newspaper writings and you know, reports. We got piles of reports this deep everywhere. We're still messing the system up. And these old scientists that I work with said, there are libraries full of information and we're still wrecking the planet, so that doesn't solve the problem.
So for farmers like me, I mean, a few years back we were funded by the CMA to take out all the weeds, including willows, right? And
You will sack them all. Just send them off. They're dismissed.
So since that's happened, we've had a lot more erosion.
Yeah, of course. Pretty simple stuff. You know how easily they buggered the place.
Would you agree with us then putting some willows back where we took them away?
Absolutely. And tell them, find it, come and see me, I'll talk to them about it. Even though they might still go crook, but I'll still tell them about it.
How much traction is there now to reverse that whole willow removal?
Huge, huge. They're just terrified at what's going to happen soon. They've spent $750 million of your money destroying our carbon commitment and all of our river systems for nothing.
The CMA will advise you every time to take your willows out.
They've been advising me too. They're getting into a lot of trouble these days.
By whom?
Me, for a start, and I'm gathering a team. I believe that a good team will beat a team of imbeciles any time. Yes, sir.
Do you, been pointing
Do we which? Speak up.
Sorry, cool burning or ecological burning practices.
Have you ever burned anything and got more out of it? How come? Because I find everything goes off in gas and I have a lot of trouble using it.
You regrow.
No, that's got to come from sunlight and a new level of productivity. If you convert it, you're actually turning that energy back into a new product, and that's valuable. As soon as you burn it, it's gone forever, into the probably 1,000-year basis before it all comes back. You can't burn anything and advance, ever. The Australian landscape, listen to me now very carefully, don't start telling me things that I know would be stupid. The landscape itself, if we go back in its history, prior humans didn't burn in periods of 300 years. Did not burn for 300 years. That's we know we can measure backwards, that's the truth. So here we have a landscape that could be burn proof if we got ahead from where it's concealed and not seeing the sunlight. Yes, sir.
Where practice in the past has been draining our swamps and our flats and all that, in theory, we should be blocking our drains off in the...
Oh, no, mate, look, and listen, we need a professional approach and we need to get it right. We just can't knee-jerk around. This is a sophisticated series of processes, and yes, you might be able to get away with that, but it's a lot better if we decide to do it as a highly professional process, because what should happen whenever you intervene in this landscape, within about 5 years, it should be able to automatically look after itself. And to test this, I've done Jerry Harvey's property in the Hunter Valley. I've done a property for Tony Coote, who's now dead, in the Maloon Creek. I've deliberately left them both for 6 and 8 years, and if they didn't progress, I wouldn't be here talking to you. And my belief is, if they can't be set up in the initial stages to look after themselves in a fairly short time, we've made a mistake. And we have to put a hand up and admit it when that happens. But don't say it can't happen, because it always will, but we make mistakes, of course we do. And so do I occasionally. I hope not too often, but I do. But I do put my hand up as soon as I realise I've made it.
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yeah, you can.
So you talked about fire not being appropriate to remove like dry matter, but then you also had a crack at grazing. So is he saying that rest is the most important tool in the landscape?
No, recycling is the most important tool.
So
it's a recycling system, the biggest one on the planet. It's all about management. I don't go for any single issue. And I don't say that one is in absence of the other always. We look at what's the result we need, what's the process we have to achieve, and then we take appropriate action to do those things. If we want to chew up a lot of vegetation and drop it down as manure, we better make sure it doesn't wash away or burn, and then it works. If we don't do those two things, we've probably wasted our time and ruined a whole lot more resources. But sheep manure is one of the hardest to deal with, simply because it's a little ball that sits around for a damn long time, and any wind or rain will wash it away. And so what we've got in most of Australia today are the ridges, and sheep will eat 90% or more of what grows there. They roll it up into that little ball, and then it disappears down into the valley. So all our ridges are stuffed today. And we need to realise that if we don't put stuff back on there as quickly as possible, the difficulty of getting the recovery is increased. And I know for this simple one, if we were to take a ton of material and put it on a ridge, if it's just rained on gently, each cell holds 5 times its own weight in water. So now we've stopped 5 tonnes running off that ridge and wrecking the rest of our land. And you've got to understand that as soon as water starts to run, the rain falls on top of water, so it can't go into the soil. It's just making a flood. Until we stop this water moving and the rain falling on top of it, we're not going to stop flooding. So when we get this exercise and we've put 1 tonne on the ridge, it's 5 tonnes of water for a start. If we do it a little bit cleverly, it's 20 tonnes of water. Then because we've kept the water there, we can usually double or treble it. Then we got to 60 tonnes of water in 5 months. And that's how quickly this could be reversed. And then we've addressed our carbon responsibility as well, because for every tonne that we can grow back, we release 3 tonnes of oxygen back into the atmosphere.
So Peter, in my suburban, fairly ignorant brain, that sounds kind of like mulching. Is it sort of that sort of equivalent?
Absolutely.
Right.
And the most successful communities ever have been the mulch farming communities, and they didn't have to prepare for war, because the more people, the more you recycle and the more productivity you can achieve. And because you keep the balances in place, because they don't allow it to wash and roll away, they keep the health up in the system. And of course, they're not around today, and nor have they been properly recorded, because imbeciles like ourselves went and took the places away from them simply because they weren't prepared to and didn't think they had to defend it. So the warlike mob went and buggered all the mulch farmers in history. But if we want to go, there's still a few in China, sometimes recorded as being operating for 5,000 years, the Dao Chinese, simply because no one else wants to live there. But they're happy. And they're making this land that no one else could use productive.
We need the Chinese then, out here.
No, we just need a brain to be sorted. We just need a little bit of a brain transplant. Then we would get it to work. No, I'm not so keen on that. That argument, you'll get me into even more trouble. Yes, sir.
So is this system being taught?
It's not this system, it's your Australian landscape science, and you own it. Do you know that? Yes, you own it. Do you see that?
Teaching it to the next generation so they can use it.
Who is?
Who is? That's my question.
As many as I can get. This fellow and his gang, a lot of people.
So it's not in mainstream academia?
Unfortunately, yes, in some cases it is. I have a few groups using the first book I wrote, which is only a description of what we're talking about here. And yes, it's been taken into the curriculums in a few universities. And certainly a lot of schools have got their little school gardens working, and every time I get a chance I go and help just fine-tune them. And I mean, it's a really simple process. If you take a worm farm, and supposing we went on any high point out here, set down the worm farm, then we put a hose in it, and every 10 minutes we marked out that wetting patch that leaks away from the worm farm. Then we cover it with mulch and put our seeds in the soil, not in the mulch. You will find that if you plant them in order of that spreading water, the companion plants, we've done everything the landscape would do. And it will send water through the soil, this step diffusion fertility, and you've got the best system on the planet, anywhere in your backyard, if that's how you want to do it. And it's not Peter Cundall or anyone like that, you know. It's Australian landscape science.
So if I wanted to learn how to do all this...
Well, I've got a son who fought me for 40 years telling him I didn't know what he was talking about. He's now obsessed. He's worse than a reformed smoker, and he calls himself Tarwin Park Training, and he does all those things. Yeah, but there's a lot more people getting started. I'm hoping that if you all help, I'm happy to go around and train these people as train the trainers, and we got probably a couple of thousand people probably within the next 6 months, which we would be capable of doing most of the out-rolling of this landscape stuff, because I've just had 40 years of battling to get it to start, so that's one wasting my time all the time, I hope. Anyway.
I think, I feel like I've been told off.
That's true, you definitely have. But we all got to put it, I got told off a few times too, and I get it almost every day because they reckon I don't know what I'm talking about, but who knows.
An amazing amount of information to take on board, and yes, as much as we want to put up our hand and say, oh, A is the answer, it's not just A, obviously. There are a lot of answers to be discovered, but in the discovering you have to do a bit of research and look at what people like Peter have written and produced for us. But one of the main things we do have to do, it's from the bottom up that the change has to take place. I think I've learned in my time on the earth that you can't expect the government to fix everything, any level of government. It has to come from us down here at the ground, at the roots, which is what Peter's been talking about. So please write your letters. Please talk to each other. Please tell everyone about what you're learning, what you're seeing, what you're hearing. And let's get a move on, because we know that's why we're here in this Botanic Gardens, to replenish our planet. And it's not just about our little patch. I get a bit funny about the colloquial, you know, I live here and there, I'm going to be doing this here and it's my spot. It's about the whole planet, and it's about community, and it's about the friendship that we can encourage as we walk down this renewable path. So thank you very much, Peter, for your
I agree with all that.